There are people in history whose lives, when seen from the outside, make you think they reached the highest point anyone could dream of. Not the height of wealth, not fame or power, but something higher than all of that. Closeness to Allah, a state in which every prayer seems to be answered, every plea seems to rise to heaven without delay. Imagine a person who lifts his hands and it feels as though the sky listens. When he whispers, the angels seem to carry those words upward. A man whose heart was once believed to have touched some of the most sacred secrets of the universe. But the most terrifying thing is not that such people exist. The most terrifying thing is that even a person like that can still lose everything. Not because he was defeated by enemies, not because of war, not because of ignorance, but because of something far smaller, something almost invisible, a subtle shift inside his own heart. This is not a gentle story that you hear once and forget. This is a warning, a mirror that, if you stare into it long enough, will begin to show you yourself. Because the real question is not who Balam was. The real question is how a man once so close to Allah could fall so far. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we do not simply retell stories from Islamic history, but go deep into the lessons that can change the way you look at your own life. If you want to keep exploring powerful, meaningful, and deeply moving stories like this, subscribe to the channel right now and support us so we can continue bringing you even more valuable content in the future. In a land once walked by prophets, us where the wind carried the scent of sacred earth and revelation had once echoed, there lived a man in quiet seclusion, almost removed from the noise of the world. He was not a king, not a warrior, not someone chasing attention. And yet his name was spoken with a unique kind of respect, a respect that did not come from power, but from what people believed he carried in his heart. Balam ibn Baura. People did not see him as a scholar alone. They believed he was a man with almost no distance between himself and the heavens. His life was simple to the point of being nearly unremarkable. No gold, no luxury, no grand gatherings. Only long nights in prayer, days spent remembering Allah, and a heart that seemed trained to return to him with every beat. His forehead carried the mark of prostration. His tongue never dried from remembrance. And in the eyes of those around him, he was not merely a good man. He was the image of purity. But what made him truly different was not just devotion. It was the knowledge he carried. People said that Balam knew one of the greatest secrets, a name not given to everyone. A name that, when called upon, made the heavens and the earth tremble. A name that, when spoken with sincerity, caused prayers to be answered without rejection. No one knew exactly what it was. No one dared to say it. But they believed. And that belief alone was enough to make even the powerful hesitate before him. Some people traveled for days just to meet him. Some came carrying pain. Some came carrying hope. Some only wanted to stand near him, as if simply being close would let them feel something sacred. When he spoke about Allah, people listened. When he prayed, people waited. And when he lifted his hands, they believed the answer was already on its way. And yet, there was something none of them understood. The greatest gifts are also the most dangerous tests. The more light a heart is given, the darker its fall can become when it turns away. Balam had lived in that peace for so long that he began to think it would never change, that his place was secure, that his path had already been settled. But while he was living through those seemingly peaceful days, the wheels of destiny had already begun to turn somewhere beyond him. A test was coming, not with swords, not with blood and war, but with the one thing that can bring down even the strongest people: temptation. And when it came, it would not knock. It would walk straight in. Fear does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it spreads slowly and silently, like a small crack in a wall that no one notices until the entire structure collapses. Jericho was living inside that kind of fear. There were no clashing swords, no flames of war, and yet the air felt heavy enough to be sensed in every breath. On the horizon, a people were approaching. Not an ordinary army. These were followers of a prophet, a man whose story had traveled farther than the lands themselves. Musa, the one who had seen the sea split, the one whose every step seemed accompanied by the power of Allah. No wall could make anyone feel safe when facing a reality like that. Inside the city, conversations were held in whispers. Eyes filled with worry. Voices trembled. Those who once trusted in their own strength now looked at one another with uncertainty. They knew that if they fought with force, they would not win. And when people realize their strength is not enough, they begin reaching for other things, things less visible, but things they believe can still change fate. And then one name was spoken. Balam. Not as a friend, not as a teacher, but as a weapon. That night they came to him, not in daylight, not openly. They carried torches, but there was no light in their eyes, only restrained panic. They spoke fast and at length, as though if they paused for even a second, fear itself would devour them. They told him about Musa. They spoke of the people drawing near. They painted a future in which their city would be taken, their families threatened, everything they had lost in a single moment. Then they looked directly at him and placed all their hope in one thing. They did not ask for advice. They did not ask for guidance. They asked him to curse. In that moment, everything became silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the truth was too obvious. Balam did not need time to think. He knew exactly what they were asking. And he knew better than anyone that Musa was not an enemy of Allah, but a prophet chosen by him. His refusal was not harsh, not angry, just a simple sentence, but one powerful enough to cut through all the hopes they had brought with them. How can I curse a prophet of Allah? That answer should have ended everything. But fear does not accept reason. It does not listen to truth. It only looks for a way to survive. And when words fail, people begin changing their method. They came back. This time they did not bring fear on their faces, and they brought carefully chosen, calm, polished words, and the very thing they knew could reach into the deepest hidden places of the human heart. Gold, not just a few coins, but heavy bags that caught the torchlight inside a dark room. Alongside that came promises, not simple promises, but carefully crafted visions. They did not say betray, they said protect. They did not say stand against truth. They said stand with your people. They called him wise, chosen, the only one who could do what no one else could do. They placed him in a position where refusal could be made to feel like abandonment of his own community. And through all of it, the gold remained there, silent, but never meaningless. Balam looked at it all. He did not touch it. He did not agree immediately. But he also did not tell them to leave, and that was the moment everything began to change. Not when he said yes, but when he stopped saying no. Their words did not strike him head on. They slipped in, gently, patiently, like smoke filling a room so slowly that no one notices until it is too late. He was still the same man, still the man who had once stood in light. But somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. No one saw it, no one heard it, but he felt it. A very slight tremor, yet enough to shake what once seemed unshakable. And when they left, leaving behind the glow of gold still hanging in the room, Balam was no longer standing where he once had. He had not yet crossed to the other side, but he was no longer fully standing in the light either. And sometimes that is the most dangerous step of all. That night lasted longer than any other. Not because time moved slowly, but because inside Balam, everything seemed trapped between two directions, unable to move forward and unable to retreat. No more peaceful moments in which remembrance flowed naturally from his tongue. No more lightness when he stood in prayer. In their place was a heavy silence, where every thought crashed into another, creating a noise that only he could hear. He knew clearly what was right. That had not changed. Musa was a prophet of Allah. That truth was as plain as daylight. But what was changing was not the truth itself. It was the way his heart responded to it. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt firm while standing with truth. Not because truth had weakened, but because something else had appeared inside him. Something small, but persistent. A voice, not loud, not overwhelming, but it would not leave, or you have spent your whole life in restraint. How many people have done what you have done? You have given up so much. Is it not time to receive something for yourself? Just this once. It cannot erase all the good you have done. Those thoughts did not come all at once. They came little by little, like drops of water falling into a still lake, sending circles outward again and again. Balam tried to push them away. He stood to pray, but the words did not feel light anymore. He recited, but the familiar closeness was gone. It was as though something had come between him and the connection he once knew. He told himself that he still had not done anything wrong, that thinking was not action, that as long as he had not crossed the line, everything remained under control. But that very thought was what brought him closer to the line, because the line is not always clear on the ground. It is a blurred place, and he was already standing inside it. When morning came and light passed through the olive branches, no light was lit inside him. The decision did not arrive like a shock. It came like exhaustion, a slight loosening, as though he no longer had the strength to keep fighting himself. He prepared to leave, not with the confidence of a man doing right, not even with the fear of a man who knows he is wrong, but in something more dangerous, self-reassurance. It is only words. It is only a prayer. No one will know. I can still come back later. Those sentences repeated in his mind, like a veil covering the truth standing in front of him. Then he stepped onto a road he once would have sworn he would never walk. The road up the mountain. The morning air was clean, but every step felt heavier than usual. The donkey he rode began to slow. At first, only hesitation. Then it stopped completely. Not from exhaustion, not because the path was too difficult, but because it saw what he did not. Balam pulled the reins and urged it forward. It did not move. He pressed harder. It still stood still. Irritation began to rise in him, a feeling that rarely visited him before. He struck it, once, then twice, but the animal would not take another step. 3 times it stopped. 3 times he grew angry. Then the impossible happened. The donkey turned back toward him, and it spoke. Its voice was not human, but every word was clear beyond doubt. Why are you striking me? What wrong have I ever done to you? Have I ever failed to carry you where you wanted to go? The space around him seemed to freeze. The wind stopped. A sound disappeared. Even time itself seemed to halt in that moment. A creature with no power of speech was speaking, not to honor him, not to serve him, but to warn him. That was not just a sign. It was intervention, a clear reminder that the road he was taking was not the right one. For one brief moment, everything became clear. He could still stop. He could still turn back. He could end everything before it became too late. But then, that moment passed. The warning remained, but its effect was no longer what it once would have been. Not because the sign had weakened, but because his heart had changed. What would once have shaken him now passed over him like a fading sound. He turned away. No argument, no real response, no further thought. He simply continued. The donkey began walking again, but each step trembled. Because it saw what he could not see. Angels standing in the road with unsheathed swords, not to attack, but to stop him. But he could not see them. And the most frightening part was not that he could not see. It was that he no longer wanted to. From that moment, the battle was over. Not because he had won, but because he had stopped fighting. The mountain stood there in silence, a witness that needed no words. From its height, the valley spread wide beneath the pale light of late afternoon. Far below, the camp of the children of Israel rested in stillness, with no sign of fear, no preparation for an invisible attack. They did not know that a man stood above them, and that his words had once held the power to alter destinies. Balam climbed slowly to the summit. No one stood beside him now. No urging voices, no gold before his eyes. None, only himself and the choice he had carried all the way there. Wind moved through his cloak, but it could not ease the heaviness in his chest. He had come too far to turn back, or at least that was what he had convinced himself. He stopped. The hands that had once risen in humility now trembled slightly, not from weakness, but because something inside was no longer clear. There was a time when all he needed was to close his eyes and call upon Allah, and certainty would flood his heart. But now even standing still had become difficult. He looked down into the valley once more. The people below were not enemies of Allah. He knew that. He had never forgotten it. But what he had forgotten was what it once felt like to fear Allah. He raised his hands. From far away, the moment would have looked no different from all the others. A man standing on a height, preparing to pray. But only he knew that this was no longer the kind of prayer he had once offered. This was speech he was trying to force into a direction that his heart no longer truly supported. He opened his mouth. The first sound that came out was not what he expected. He stopped. A brief flash of confusion passed through him. Perhaps his mind was not focused. He drew a deep breath, closed his eyes, and tried to gather what concentration remained. Then he tried again, this time with greater determination. The words began to form, but the moment they left his lips, they changed. Not curses, but blessings. He opened his eyes as if he could not believe what had just happened. He tried again. The more he attempted to control his speech, the clearer the result became, and every sentence he meant as destruction turned into a prayer for protection. Every intention he directed toward darkness was pulled back toward light. Confusion quickly became panic. He could no longer control the very thing that had once been his greatest strength. His tongue no longer belonged to him. He felt it more clearly than anyone else could, as though an invisible force was gripping it, turning it, forcing it to say what he no longer wished to say. And the more he resisted, the more he realized that the power to decide had been taken from him. This was not ordinary failure. This was removal. A man once given the ability to make prayers rise, answered, could no longer even control his own words. The connection he once had, the thing that had set him apart from everyone else, was no longer there. Not because Allah had changed, knew us, but because he had changed. Down in the valley, those who had been waiting began to understand that something was wrong. What they heard was not what they had paid so dearly to obtain. Their trust quickly turned to suspicion, then to anger. The man in whom they had placed their hopes had become an unbearable disappointment. On the mountaintop, Balam no longer stood like a man of spiritual power. He stood like a man who had just lost himself. Sweat poured from him, not because of the sun, but because of a fear he could not name. Not the fear of a man facing an enemy, but the fear of a soul realizing it had just lost the most precious thing it ever had. He had not been stopped on the road. He had been allowed to come all the way here, but not to succeed. He had been allowed to see the consequence, and to understand that there are boundaries which, once crossed, cannot always be walked back the same way. He stood there between sky and earth, between who he once was and what he had become. No one was left to blame. No circumstance remained to hide behind. Only one cold truth. When the heart turns away from Allah, even the greatest gifts can become a burden. And in that moment, Balam was no longer the man the heavens once listened to. He was only a man listening to silence. When a person loses himself, the terrifying part is not that he stops. The terrifying part is that he keeps going, only in another direction. Balam came down from the mountain not as a man awakened, but as a man torn away from his own nature. He was no longer the one who trembled before Allah, no longer the man who found peace in long nights of prayer. Yet, neither had he become a completely different person. He was trapped between two states, awake enough to know he was wrong, but no longer carrying enough light to return. The silence inside him was not repentance. It was emptiness. And when emptiness is not filled with return, it will find something else to fill it. For Balam, that something was not remorse. It was bitterness. The people who once came to him no longer looked at him the same way. Their eyes changed. No more respect, no more trust. Only disappointment mixed with anger. They had placed their hope in him as a weapon, and he had failed. But what they did not understand was that this failure was not the worst part. The worst part was what came after. When people cannot achieve what they want directly, they begin looking for another path. And when someone who once understood truth begins using that understanding in a crooked direction, his danger grows far greater. Balam no longer tried to oppose them with prayer. He no longer sought a direct confrontation. He began thinking another way. If they cannot be destroyed by curse, then let them be made to destroy themselves. That thought did not come like a flash of insight. It came darker, slower, but unmistakably clear. He understood the weakness of human beings. He knew how the heart wavers. He knew that collapse does not always come from outside. It can begin from within, quietly, without anyone noticing until it is too late. And so a plan took shape. No swords, no blood, no screams, only smile. Women were sent, not with weapons, but with beauty, softness, and gentle words. They came with fragrance, glances, and gestures that appeared harmless. No one was forced. No one was threatened. Everything happened naturally, too naturally. At first, it was only exchanged glances, then conversations, then steps taken closer. Then the boundaries began to blur. What once had been guarded became treated lightly. What once had been clear became reinterpreted in ways easier to accept. Sin did not arrive like a storm. It spread like ink in water, slowly, but impossible to stop. And once it had spread far enough, the consequence could no longer be avoided. Another silence settled over the camp of the children of Israel. But this time it was not peace. It was the heaviness before a storm. Then it came. No clear warning, no time to prepare. A plague spread. Fast, cruel, uncontrollable. Healthy people fell. Voices cried out in the night. Panic spread. And then they began to understand. Not all at once, but enough to realize that what they had allowed to enter among them had not been harmless. This was not random punishment, it was consequence. But Allah did not allow it to continue forever. When the truth was recognized, when the source of the wrongdoing was identified, action was taken. The corruption was stopped. And when that happened, the plague stopped as well. Justice does not arrive late. It arrives at the right time. Balam stood outside all of it. He held no weapon. He gave no direct order. But his trace was there. In the idea. In the plan. In every step that led to the damage. He had not destroyed them with speech, but he had helped create the road that led to their suffering. And when everything settled, nothing was left for him. No honor, no reward, no respect, so only a man left behind. The promises of power vanished. The people who once sought him turned away. The city he once walked through with reverence now felt strange. No one spoke his name the same way. No one came to him anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they did not want to remember. But the worst part was not how others saw him. It was what happened inside him. His body began to show signs of the collapse that had already happened in his soul. His tongue became heavy, no longer an instrument of prayer, no longer a means of connection to Allah. It became a burden, a mark, a symbol of what had been lost. It hung from him without control. His breathing became labored, harsh, like an exhausted animal. Not because he was fleeing, not because he was fighting, but because he had entered a condition with no resting point. Whether he moved forward or backward, he could not find peace. That image was not only an ending, it was a warning. A man who had once known light, but chose to cling to the earth. A heart once entrusted with truth, but turned toward desire. And when everything ended, nothing remained except an example that time itself would not erase. Not to entertain, but to warn. That sometimes what causes a person to fall is not that he did not know the right path. It is that he knew it and still chose another way. The deepest lesson is not only where Balam went wrong, it is that he did not stop while he still could. When the heart is still sensitive to reminders, when signs from Allah are still clear, when the inner struggle is still alive, that is when a person still has a chance. Once the heart grows used to ignoring those warnings, even miracles may no longer affect it. So how does this apply to our lives today? Start with the smallest things. Do not treat a wrong thought lightly. Do not ignore a wrong action just because it seems small. Learn to stop early, before stopping becomes difficult. Examine your heart often. What is making you waver? What is slowing you down when it comes to doing what is right? And most importantly, keep a healthy fear, not fear of failing before people, but fear of losing your connection with Allah. If stories like this help you think more deeply, slow down, and recognize what matters most in life, join the Prophetic History Explained community so we can continue exploring meaningful stories from Islamic history together, along with lessons about faith, steadfastness, and how to protect the heart in a world full of temptation. And do not forget to subscribe to support us so we can continue bringing you even more thoughtful and valuable content in the videos ahead.